I don't think I've been in direct contact with him, but with any project that is with Aphex Twin, whether it be this or whether it be Cyro from previously, my point of view is this: I seem to be given either a series of map references or coordinates, or part of an equation that requires some solving on my part. So I'm merely supplying back the results of what I've found without placing any sense of context on it.
His main thing was, he only had one kind of thing he wanted, was that there was a sense of collapsing. So it was just trying to visualize collapsing somehow.
What I always try and do is I kind of strip out who it's for. It's almost like you're not working for a record label or client. It's like you're working for a scientist.
Basicness of it is construction, deconstruction and reconstruction, really, as to how you want to interpret that. That's fine, really, but I went to see Blade Runner, that new one, and I kind of thought, okay, so the original Blade Runner was based on this thing that was, do androids dream of electric sheep? I kind of thought, oh yeah, and what would androids see if they were hallucinating? And I find like the first part of the track is quite like a mixture of amphetamine and ketamine. And it's a combination that I've never done, but it would be such a weird thing of like being K'd up and kind of speeding at the same time. And I thought, oh, how would an android see that, basically? So that was some of the visual aesthetics I was going for. And the second part is very much like a K-hole. So how would an android deal with a K-hole situation? And the last one is so lush, it's so LSD, DMT, MDMA-ish kind of thing. So I just went for that kind of vibe, because that's what the music sounded like to me. I was kind of trying to bring it back to a kind of 90s vibe, because I've been a big fan of Warp and Aphex since the early 90s, and I wanted to bring it back to the whole Designers Republic look and the whole 90s vibe of what we're doing back then, because it's the first time I've done a proper video for Warp, but it's mainly trying to recreate the On video, because I remember seeing that on the chart show when that came out, and that was like, wow, it's amazing. And also trying to be a bit like Ganz Graft by Ptak, so in that kind of sound reactive thing. Because a lot of the artwork back then for Richard was a lot of it was in Cornwall. I thought I'd go back to Cornwall and visit all the places that are relevant to him. So one of his friends, Math, just took me around, you know, someone he knows from his when he went to college and all that. So he took me all to the nice, relevant places in Cornwall. So then I got inspired as to what I would use, because originally I wanted to just do all the cliffs, like what he had in Polygon Window, which I went there and I just did loads of photogrammetry of that. But in the end I really fell in love with all the cottages, because they were just so kind of like man-made but quite organic. Always really into getting all the audio stems and if possible the MIDI data to kind of sync it up to the visuals that I'm doing. But even like sometimes I just like getting it so that I have all the stems and I kind of see what reacts more at certain points, so that helps me with the decision making of what should react to what at some point. And I found for that middle section there's loads of BPM changes, and it took quite a while to get that working, because the sequencer that Richard's using, this Circlone thing, is really great, but it's really not good at exporting data that's useful for other software. So he had to send me screen grabs of all the different points. I had to manually figure out where the BPM changes. It took quite a while, but I made the most of it once I got it. And that's why I kind of don't want to reveal too much about the meaning. Or me and Richard really like how people read into it, really. For the silver version, which needed to be done before, because we knew there was going to be a lot of back and forth with that, because it was a bit unclear as to what the design process was going to be, because I don't think anyone's done anything with that technique for a while, and it was really unclear to us as what the possibilities and the limitations were going to be. So I did that first. The reason Richard picked that technique is because he's got a few of those original 60s avant-garde music kind of vinyls.
Perspective 21 Siècle was a record label or an imprint of Philips that was set up by Francois Bale and Pierre-Henri in the late 60s. People do say that it might have been to set themselves up in competition with Deutsche Grammophon, who were doing a similar sort of thing with electroacoustic avant-garde music, because at that time there was no such thing as electronic music as such. There was the machinery and the tools to do it. Through the 60s and going through the 70s, a number of releases were produced using this metallic process, which is a combination of printing, engraving, foiling and lamination on a particular type of board which is receptive. The original sleeves tend to use a kind of all-over general sort of pattern, but they got more and more complicated and more specific as the sleeves developed, so they got more into like the shapes or whatever it was. And then this particular process was adopted into the 70s by other record labels for other types of releases. Trojan Records, for instance, did 2 compilations that I can remember. The BBC had used it. And then I think to a certain extent, the process is quite unique and it's sort of hardwired to really fall out of favour.
So I wanted to do something in that kind of style of the 60s bold stuff. So I did something in the style of Vasarely. So I'm really keen on this guy's stuff. So I tried to do something a bit like that, but with his logo. But the one thing that Richard told me is that he wanted it to be not too obvious. You know, he wanted something that you look into it, but you don't really see the logo that straight away. And I wanted to add the whole collapsing vibe to it. So it's a combination of these 3 things.
There's no direct way you can sort of say, I want that, or I want it to feel like that. It's like looking at that black and white logo, Aphex Twin logo, and saying, well, how can it work? So it was reduced to a series of lines. There was one version which was a series of lines and steps, quite basic. Then there was another one that was kind of very moire and everything else. The ones that we did as tests kind of looked at all of that. This was a more complicated design, but actually taking the basic elements of the design and applying standard feels to it. If we go back to the original perspective sleeves, it does reference the future in an odd sort of way. If you imagine the future to be holographic, metallic, and having some sort of lenticular movement, which is where this process came from, the ability to create some movement and dynamism into the cover. And I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to it, because it's not a very digital process. It's very, very analog. It's very, very traditional and craft. The person who engraved it, Handy Bendy Wendy, she's more akin to George Peckham, Porky's Prime Cuts. Now, Porky would engrave in the run-out grooves messages and secret things, as would Handy Bendy Wendy. She would secrete in the previous sleeves hidden messages. She has various engraving tools and implements. She has various engraving sheets and things that she applies to certain areas. She's aware of what those things do, and then depending on the orientation of how they're placed on the board, they will act in certain ways. So certain lines, if they go one way, will flip or they will turn that way. So she'll take certain known elements and put them all together, so bolting them all together to create this engraved pattern. The thing that I think it closely resembles or mirrors is the promo that Weirdcore did. And it's kind of like, it's an accessory to it. This is almost like that bit in 2001 where they're going through towards the end of the movie, where they're going through the portal. I don't know whether this is going through the promo or whether the promo is going through to this kind of dead space the astronaut goes into.
And then for the full colour version, originally the idea was to have a still from the video, but I was just so way past the deadline, like I was nowhere near finished. So I tried to retain this kind of collapsing sense that I had with the silver version. And one thing that I had finished was that whole bit that's a bit like Gwyneth Pip. I didn't actually go to that place, but I'd seen it in that kind of John Peel interview where Richard and Luke Vibert were interviewed. And I kind of recreated an Aphex version of that. And I thought, okay, I'll use that. And then when I was at Richard's place, in the bathroom, he had a poster of an aerial view, which I assume is Cornwall. So I thought, okay, that could work. Because the silver version had to be like just 2 or 3 colours, although it's not, you don't see colours, it's different styles of etching. Now that I could do something that wasn't blocky and HD, I thought I'd go for something quite epic. So I thought this aerial view would work quite well. That's completely collapsing, and that kind of worked out quite good.
It's a relic from the future, or it's a relic of the future, created by somebody in the past, trying to imagine what the future would be like. It's science fiction, it's lasers, it's holograms, it's tomorrow's world, it's Arthur C. Clarke. It contains all of those elements. For me, as a process, as a piece of packaging, it's very unique at the moment. Whether it will be further applied, I don't know, but to go to the furthest reaches of somebody who may or may not create this in this whatever genre, it struck a very big line in the sand for anybody to try and cross.